A kind waitress fed 2 black orphans, and 12 years later, a luxury car appeared outside her home. Before we dive into this incredible story, we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and if you believe that a single act of kindness can truly change the world. The wind in Havenwood was a cruel thing, a predator that hunted the gaps in window frames and the worn thin wool of old coats. It was a January wind, sharp with the memory of ice, and it made the entire town feel like a forgotten relic shivering under a shroud of perpetual gray. For Elara Mae Thompson, the wind was just another creditor she couldn't pay. It stole the warmth from her small apartment above the diner she owned, a diner that was bleeding its life away, drop by precious drop, onto the cracked linoleum floor. The beacon, that's what her husband, David, had called it. He'd had a poet's heart and a dreamer's soul, qualities that made him a wonderful man but a poor businessman. When he'd passed from a sudden sickness 2 years prior, he'd left Elara with his love, his dreams, and a mountain of debt that cast a shadow over every sunrise. The diner sign, a proud neon cursive, now flickered pathetically, the B and the N long since surrendered to the cold. It was more an SOS than a beacon now. Elara stood behind the counter, her hands, chapped and red, tracing the rim of a coffee mug. The diner was empty, as it often was these days. The whole town was empty. The mill had closed a decade ago, and Havenwood had been slowly exhaling ever since, its life force thinning with each family that packed up and left. Those who remained were ghosts of a sort, haunting the familiar streets with tightened belts and downcast eyes. There was no money for luxuries like eating out, not even for a cup of coffee at the Beacon, where Elara kept the prices so low she was practically paying people to sit in her booths. Tonight, her desperation was a physical presence, a cold knot in the pit of her stomach. Her own pantry was nearly bare. Her dinner, waiting for her in the kitchen, was a single lonely potato. She'd planned to fry it with the last nub of butter and the half-onion sitting on the sill. It wasn't much, but it would be warm. It would be something. Outside, the snow had begun to fall. Not the gentle, picturesque flakes of holiday cards, but a mean, driving sleet that slapped against the plate glass window. The bell above the door chimed, a sound so rare it made Elara flinch. 2 figures stood there, stamping the snow from their worn boots, their small forms silhouetted against the swirling white outside. They were boys no older than 10 and 12. They were black, a fact that shouldn't have mattered but did, here in Havenwood, a town that was as homogeneous as it was impoverished. They wore jackets that were no match for the wind, their faces pinched with cold, their eyes wide and dark and holding a desperate, hunted look that Elara recognized from her own mirror. They didn't move from the doorway, as if they were afraid the scant warmth of the diner might be a mirage. The older boy had a protective arm half-raised in front of the younger one, his small shoulders squared with a burden far too heavy for his age. "We're closed," Elara started to say, the words automatic, a defense mechanism against further loss. Her gaze fell to their hands, raw and purpled by the cold, and the words died in her throat. Her heart, a weary and battered thing, gave a painful lurch of compassion. She saw not 2 strangers but 2 children, lost, hungry, cold. She saw the reflection of her own aching solitude. "Come in," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "Come on. Get out of that storm." The older boy hesitated, his eyes darting around the empty diner as if searching for a trap. The younger one looked up at him, a silent question passing between them. Finally, the older boy gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, and they shuffled to the nearest booth, sliding onto the cracked red vinyl with a shared sigh of relief. They didn't speak. They just sat there, shivering, watching her with an intensity that felt like a judgment. Elara knew what she should do. She should tell them she had nothing to give, that she was barely surviving herself. Every slice of bread, every scoop of coffee, was a number in a ledger that always came up red. Mr. Silas Thorne, the man who held the loan on the diner, had been by just yesterday, his presence filling the room with the cloying scent of cheap cigars and avarice. He tapped a thick finger on her account book, his voice a low growl. Charity starts at home, Illara. And your home is about to be my property. The memory of his words was a fresh sting. But then she looked at the boys again. She saw the way the younger one's teeth chattered, the way the older one tried to hide his trembling by clenching his fists on the tabletop. In their dark, solemn eyes, she saw the echoes of every person who had ever been left out in the cold, every soul that had ever been told they were not enough, that they did not belong. Her own hunger, her own fear, felt small in that moment. The single potato in the kitchen seemed to weigh 100 pounds. It was her meal. It was her only meal. To give it away felt like an act of profound, terrifying foolishness. It was the last crumbling brick in her own foundation. The bell chimed again, this time with a violent jangle that spoke of impatience. The door swung open and Silas Thorne himself filled the frame, his bulk blocking out the dying light. Snow clung to the shoulders of his expensive overcoat. He stomped his feet, dislodging clumps of slush onto the mat Illara had just cleaned. "Evening, Illara," he said, his eyes scanning the empty diner with a predatory gleam. His gaze landed on the two boys in the booth. A sneer twisted his lips. "What's this? Running a shelter now?" Illara felt a flush of anger, hot and sharp. She straightened her spine. "They came in from the storm, Mr. Thorne." "The storm isn't going to pay your bills," he grunted, walking to the counter and slapping his leather gloves down. "I came for this week's payment. Don't tell me you don't have it." "I have some of it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She knew it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Thorne laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Some of it? That's what you said last week." He gestured with his chin towards the boys. "And you're getting ready to give away free food to them? Do you have any idea how bad that looks? People in this town talk. They'll think you're desperate. Or worse, a fool." Every word was a small, deliberate cruelty. He wanted her to fail. He wanted the beacon. He had been circling it for months, waiting for her to stumble so he could snatch it up for pennies on the dollar and sell the land to some developer. She looked from Thorne's smug, fleshy face to the boys in the booth. They were trying to make themselves smaller, to disappear into the cracked vinyl. The younger one had his head down, but the older one was watching the exchange, his jaw tight with a silent, powerless fury. In his eyes, Illara saw a fire that she thought had been extinguished in herself. A choice presented itself, clear and stark as the winter landscape outside. She could appease Thorne. She could turn the boys out into the storm, save her potato for herself, and hand over the meager contents of her cash register to buy herself another few days of this slow, agonizing defeat. It was the logical choice, the sensible choice, the choice of a survivor. Or she could choose to be a beacon just for one night, even if the light was flickering, even if it was about to go out for good. She took a deep breath, the cold air steadying her. She met Thorne's gaze, her own clear and unwavering. "The payment is in the register, Mr. Thorne. Take what you're owed then," without breaking eye contact. She raised her voice just enough for the boys to hear. "You too must be starving. How about the house special? It's real good tonight. Comes with fried potatoes, onions, and all the hot chocolate you can drink." Thorne's face purpled with rage. He saw her defiance for what it was. It wasn't about the food. It was about the principle. It was her drawing a line in the sand of her own soul. He snatched the cash from the register, counted it with contemptuous slowness, and stuffed it into his pocket. "You've just made a very big mistake, Illara," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "A very big, very costly mistake." He turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled in its frame. The silence he left behind was heavy. The boys were still staring at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and awe. The older one finally spoke, his voice raspy with disuse. You didn't have to do that, ma'am." Illara walked over to their booth, a genuine smile touching her lips for the first time in what felt like years. The knot of desperation in her stomach had loosened, replaced by a strange, quiet warmth. "Nonsense," she said, her voice full of a conviction she didn't know she possessed. No one should be out in a storm like this. And everyone deserves a hot meal. She went into the kitchen, and with hands that felt steady and sure, she took her single potato, the half onion, and the last 2 eggs from the carton. She found a can of corned beef in the back of a cupboard she'd forgotten about. It was a feast. As she cooked, the smell of frying potatoes and onions filled the small diner, chasing away the scent of Thorne's cheap cigars and the lingering chill of despair. It was the smell of home, the smell of hope. She brought them 2 heaping plates and 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate topped with the last of the marshmallows. They ate with a silent, desperate urgency that broke her heart. They didn't speak a word until their plates were clean. The younger boy, whose name she learned was Leo, looked up at her, a smear of chocolate on his upper lip. "That was the best food I ever had," he said, his voice small but sincere. The older boy, Marcus, nodded in agreement. He looked at her, his gaze direct and serious. "We don't have any money, ma'am, but we'll pay you back. Promise. We will. Don't you worry about that," Alara said, collecting their plates. "You just stay warm." They stayed for another hour, soaking in the warmth, their shivering finally subsiding. They spoke little about themselves, only that they were headed somewhere else. Alara didn't press. She understood the need for secrets, for protecting the small, fragile flame of one's own story. When the storm lessened to a gentle flurry, Marcus stood up. "We have to go," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, placing it on the table. It was a little wolf, crudely but lovingly carved from a piece of dark wood. "This is for you. So you remember us." "I won't forget," Alara promised. They walked to the door and paused, turning back one last time. "Thank you," Marcus said, and the words held the weight of a sacred vow. Then they were gone, swallowed by the winter night, leaving behind only their small footprints in the fresh snow and the carved wolf on the table. Alara picked it up. It was smooth and cool in her palm. For the first time all night, she felt the sharp pang of her own hunger, but it was overshadowed by a feeling of profound rightness. She had made her choice. Whatever came next, she would face it. The consequences came swiftly. Thorne, true to his word, made her life a living hell. He started foreclosure proceedings immediately. He spread rumors through the town that she was giving away food while honest. Paying customers were turned away, that she was attracting undesirables, the few regulars she had began to drift away, their shame-faced apologies and averted gazes hurting more than Thorne's open hostility. The beacon grew colder, quieter. The flickering sign finally gave out completely, plunging the front of the diner into darkness. The years that followed were a long, slow grind. Alara fought to keep the diner, taking on odd jobs, mending clothes, cleaning houses, pouring every cent she earned into the bottomless pit of debt. She grew thinner, her face more deeply etched with worry, but she never regretted her decision. On the loneliest nights, when the cold seemed to seep into her very bones, she would take out the small wooden wolf. She'd run her thumb over its smooth, carved back and remember the look in those 2 boys' eyes. It was a memory of a single moment of grace in a lifetime of struggle, a reminder that even in the darkest night, she had chosen to be a light. She lost the diner, of course. Thorne won. He took the building, and the sign that read "The Beacon" was torn down. He let the property sit empty for a while, a monument to his victory, before selling it for a tidy profit. Alara was forced to move into a tiny, run-down rental on the edge of town, a place with drafty windows and a ghost in the plumbing. Her life shrank until it was contained within those 4 crumbling walls. 12 years passed. 12 long winters, each one colder than the last. Havenwood withered further. Alara grew older. The fire she'd felt that long-ago night had banked to a low, quiet ember. She survived, but she no longer truly lived. She kept to herself, a quiet woman haunted by the ghost of a dream. The wooden wolf was her only treasure, a relic from a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Then, one crisp autumn morning, the world changed. She was sitting on her porch steps, nursing a cup of weak tea, watching the rust-colored leaves skitter across the cracked pavement. A sound broke the morning quiet, a low, powerful thrum that grew into a deep, resonant purr. It was the sound of an engine unlike any that had ever graced the broken streets of Havenwood. A car, long and sleek and black as polished jet, glided to a stop in front of her house. It was a vehicle of impossible luxury, a creature from another world. The sun gleamed off its chrome, so bright it made her squint. The driver's side door opened, and a man emerged. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her entire house. He moved with an easy, confident grace. Then the passenger door opened, and a second man got out. He was leaner but just as tall, with a kind, intelligent face and eyes that seemed to see everything. They stood there for a moment side by side, looking at her small, dilapidated house. Then they turned and looked directly at her. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She felt a tremor of fear, the old instinct of someone accustomed to bad news. But then she looked closer, past the expensive suits and the air of power. She looked into their eyes, and she saw it. The same fire, the same gratitude, the same soul-deep seriousness she had seen across a diner table 12 years ago. Her breath caught in her throat. Couldn't be. The taller, broader man took a step forward. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a deep baritone that held a note of gentle uncertainty. "Ma'am, is your name Alara Thompson?" She could only nod, her throat too tight for words. He smiled, a slow, brilliant thing that transformed his face. "I'm Marcus. And this is my brother, Leo," he gestured to the other man, who was also smiling now. "We told you we'd be back to pay you for dinner." Alara stood up, her legs unsteady. She stared at them, these two men who were once two boys, and the intervening years collapsed into a single, breathless moment. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sudden. I remember," she whispered. "We never forgot," Leo said, his voice soft. "You saved us that night, in more ways than 1 inch." Marcus stepped onto the porch. He was so close now she could see the fine weave of his suit, the quiet strength in his face. "We made a promise, to you and to ourselves, that we would repay your kindness." He looked around at the peeling paint on her house, the sagging porch rail. "And it looks like we're just in time." What followed was a blur, a cascade of events so overwhelming and wonderful it felt like a dream. Marcus made a phone call. Within the hour, a wire transfer was made to Havenwood's local bank, paying off the entirety of Alara's accumulated debts with an amount so large it left the bank manager stammering. But they were just getting started. "Where is Mr. Thorne now?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but with a hard edge of steel beneath it. Alara, still dazed, told them he owned half the town now, including a real estate office on Main Street, right across from the empty lot where the beacon once stood. Marcus and Leo exchanged a look. "Let's go for a ride," Marcus said. They drove Alara to Main Street in the silent, leather-scented interior of the luxury car. They walked into Thorne's office. He was behind his desk, older, fatter, but with the same smug look on his face. He didn't recognize Alara at first. He just saw two wealthy, powerful-looking black men, and his face lit up with avarice. "Gentlemen, what can I do for you? Looking to invest in our charming little town?" "We are," Marcus said, his voice flat and cold. He placed a briefcase on Thorne's desk and snapped it open. It was full of legal documents. "We've just purchased the holding company that owns this building, and the old diner lot across the street, and about 6 other properties you control." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "This is your eviction notice. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises." Thorne's face went from smug to confused to chalk white in a matter of seconds. He stared at the documents, then at Marcus and Leo, and finally, his eyes landed on Alara, standing quietly behind them. A flicker of recognition, then dawning horror, spread across his features. "You!" he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at her. "This is because of you." "No," Leo said softly, stepping forward. "This is because of you, Mr. Thorne. This is the bill for a meal that was served 12 years ago." It seems the interest has compounded. They left Thorne sputtering in his office and walked Alara across the street to the vacant lot where her diner once stood. A large construction truck was already pulling up to the curb. A crew of hard-hatted men and women began to unload equipment. What is this?" Alara asked, her voice trembling. "We're rebuilding it," Marcus said simply. "The beacon. Bigger, better, brighter than before. And it's yours. The deed, the land, everything. No loans, no debts. Just yours." He then handed her another set of keys. "We also bought the house you're renting. A crew is there right now, fixing it from the foundation up. New roof, new plumbing, new everything." Alara finally broke. The tears she'd held back for 12 long years flowed freely, tears of shock, of relief, of a joy so profound it was painful. She looked at these two men, these boys she had fed with her last potato, and saw the living, breathing embodiment of a hope she had long since abandoned. Over the next few weeks, Havenwood watched in stunned silence as a miracle unfolded. The old diner was reborn, a beautiful modern building with gleaming windows and a brand-new neon sign that glowed with a warm, steady, unwavering light. Alara's little house was transformed into the coziest, most beautiful home on the block. The story spread like wildfire. The whole town learned of the night too cold. Hungry boys had stumbled into the beacon, and how the town's most struggling resident had given them everything she had. They saw Silas Thorne, stripped of his properties and his power, pack up and leave town in disgrace. The community, which had once shunned Alara, now looked at her with a mixture of shame and reverence. They had been blind to the angel living among them. On the grand opening night of the new beacon, the entire town showed up. The place was packed, buzzing with laughter and conversation. Alara, dressed in a new uniform, moved through the booths, her face radiant. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was the heart of the town, the woman who had proven that kindness was an investment that yielded impossible returns. Later that evening, after the crowds had thinned, she sat in a booth with Marcus and Leo. They told her their story. After leaving Havenwood, they'd been found by a man who ran a unique organization, a sort of modern-day brotherhood, a motorcycle club called the Night Wolves that took in lost kids and gave them a family, a code, and a purpose. They'd worked hard, excelled, and eventually took over the club's legitimate and highly successful construction and logistics businesses. They had become wealthy and powerful, but they had never forgotten the code they lived by: loyalty, honor, and the repayment of all debts, especially those of kindness. "That wolf I gave you," Marcus explained, "is our symbol. It means you're one of the pack, protected." Alara reached into her pocket and placed the small, worn wooden wolf on the table between them. It looked tiny and humble next to their expensive watches and cufflinks, but in that moment, it was the most valuable thing in the room. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The meal was a gift. And this is our gift back," Leo said, covering her hand with his own. "You gave us more than food that night, Alara. You gave us hope. You showed us that there was still light in the world. You were our beacon. It's only right that we relight yours." From that day on, Alara was never alone. Marcus and Leo were her sons, her family. They and their pack were frequent visitors to Havenwood, their presence helping to revitalize the struggling town. The beacon became a landmark, a testament to the enduring power of a single, selfless act. Alara lived out her days in warmth and security, surrounded by a loving, unconventional family. She never lost the quiet humility that had defined her, and she continued to offer a hot meal to anyone who came to her door in need. She knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her soul, that the truest wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in the love you give away. For in the strange and beautiful calculus of the human heart, it is only by emptying our hands that we can ever hope to be truly filled. Thank you for joining us for this heartwarming story. If it touched your heart, please consider subscribing to our channel for more inspirational content. And remember, you never know when a simple act of compassion might just change the world.